topic for today is around safer digital learning, and we're going to be sharing our 10 security tips for Google Workspace. And these are things which we look for in the security audits which we do at apps events. And now just a couple of highlights here on things we're doing at apps events. And we're going to be talking a bit more about this in just a moment, but just to highlight that we are also we deliver security assessments, so security audits and health checks for schools in terms of how Google Workspace is set up and configured, whether it's following best practices, how managing things like users, how groups are managed, and how the overall admin console is configured to make sure it's configured in the best and most secure way possible. And we'll be talking a bit more about that service in just a moment and sharing some of our tips and tricks there for making your domains the most secure. And also just to highlight, we also now support schools directly with our expertise. Charlie and I both support a growing number of schools with Google Workspace, and this is providing technical support, so enhancing what schools already have within their own technical teams, making sure we're providing the latest updates there, making sure it's configured in the best way possible, but also crucially upskilling school teams as well. So if you're interested in this service, then please do get in touch. Right, now I'm going to switch my slide deck to this one, and let's talk about security. So as I mentioned earlier, for the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, we've been running security audits at apps events, and we've done this for quite a large number of schools now. The audit process was developed in conjunction with Google, and today we're going to take you through some of the things we look for in these security health checks and share some of our tips for how to make your domain more secure and safer for your learners. So let's get started. And I always start with this one. I think this is the most crucial feature schools can enable for making accounts more secure and preventing unauthorized access. So two-step verification means that users can only authenticate to an account if they provide something they know, like a password, and something they have, like a security key or text message or authenticator app. And only when you have those two methods to prove your identity is that logon authorized. I recommend turning this on for all of your admin accounts, especially, but also for your staff accounts. And this is, like I say, one of the best ways of protecting your accounts.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, folks, that when turning this on, that we're talking about enforcing that feature. So that's enforcing it to make sure that folks are actually using it. You can have it enabled so people can turn it on as if they wish to in their Google account, but we're talking about enforcing that, so they have to use the two-step verification when they sign into their account.
Exactly, yeah, and you can do this via the admin console. If you go to security, authentication, and two-step verification, I'm just going to select one of my sub-OUs here. So let's just turn this on for our teachers in this example. In fact, it's already been turned on for this OU. So you can see here, we've got the option to allow users to turn on two-step verification, but we're also enforcing that. If you're just launching it and want to turn it on in the future, you can select on from date. And what this does is when you set the date in which it must be enforced, users will get a notification when they log in if it's not already turned on their accounts. You can also give a grace period for new users. So if you've got a new member of staff joining the school, you could give them a grace period of 1 week so they can get signed on, set their password, and then make sure they enroll in two-step verification. And just a bit further down here, we've got the ability to trust devices or not. So perhaps you might have a school-assigned Chromebook for each of your teachers, in which case you might want to trust that device because it's a device you manage, you know it's secure. You might want to let teachers trust those devices so it doesn't prompt them again and again, and you're getting that right balance between usability and security. And last of all, you can also control what authentication methods are available. Well, one thing I do notice sometimes in audits is there's sometimes a reason why perhaps members within a teacher's OU may temporarily need two-step verification to be turned off. The best way of achieving that is to use an override group, and you can specify that here and then disable it for that particular group. So then users within that OU who are a member of that group, that setting will take precedence and two-step verification will be turned off for them, rather than making a separate OU and moving users around. Always recommend using groups there. Okay, so this is, I think you'll agree, Charlie, this is another really key area for schools to manage. So security best practices around managing administrator accounts. So I've already mentioned it's a really good idea to have two-step verification turned on your admin accounts. Don't share your admin accounts amongst users. This is important so that all actions are tracked and you know which admin made a particular change when you're looking in the audit log. You also want to set up multiple administrator accounts and don't use your super admin account for daily activities. Have a separate staff account, which you use for your regular schoolwork, emails, and using other third-party services. But when it comes to managing things in the admin console as a super admin, have that as a separate account. One area which often gets overlooked is important announcements from Google. These by default go to the primary admin on the admin console. It's a really good idea to set up a forwarding rule on those messages so that these go to other admins as well, just in case the primary admin might not be one which gets used very often. I sometimes hear of schools missing these important updates. A good example of that is when Google changed the quota for shared drives earlier this year to 100 gigabytes. And that did catch a few schools out, unfortunately, because these updates weren't going to all the admin accounts on the system. And one last thing, I also recommend setting up activity rules in your admin console to monitor for sensitive activities. And these are things such as, let's say someone gets assigned the super admin role or makes a change to one of the other admin roles. You want to get alerts about those because these are really crucial powers. And with great power, as we all know, comes great responsibility. So really important to just have oversight of that and track those changes. Anything else you think to add there, Charlie, from your experience?
No, I think you covered that really well. I think the important thing, there's something really important about that kind of, let's call it the generic admin accounts and folks sharing those. I think it's important that individual administrators, as we've mentioned, Peter, have their own accounts so you can track changes, know who's done what in the domain. That's really important. And Google has a set of best practices, which I think you've linked to in the deck, which is great for folks to review.
Exactly. No, just that's a good reminder for me. I'm just going to share this deck now. So we've got links here for all of these and with additional guidance here. So you can just click on learn more and it goes to Google's own articles on security best practices for all these areas we're about to share. So another key area to look at is how you manage leavers. So when members of staff leave the school, it's really important to have a very clear process there, which always gets followed consistently. And you check often to make sure that process is being followed correctly. So when a member of staff leaves, of course, you want to suspend that user after they've left and after they had an opportunity to take out anything they may have created on their school domain, which they want to take with them. But on takeout, Google Takeout that is, I recommend you should have that turned off for staff. Google Takeout, it's a great service for students, but the trouble with Takeout is it will take out everything which that user has access to. So anything which has been shared with them, anything which is shared domain-wide. Otherwise, they could be taking out potentially sensitive data. So I highly recommend turning that off for staff. And if they do need to take anything out, then just encourage them to drop it into a folder in their drive and then just download that folder and take it with them that way. Much safer way of doing it. It's a good idea to wipe any mobile devices they might have signed into their school account with. and wipe that profile from there, you can do that through the admin console. You also want to revoke password recovery access, so remove any additional addresses, email addresses that user may have set up on their account. You might want to change their user's password as well, and also revoke all OAuth 2.0 application tokens. So that ensures they're signed out of any other apps they may have signed in to using their Google account. Likewise, from the user profile page on the admin console, under security, it's also a good idea to reset that user's sign-in cookies. And that just ensures that once they have left, they get signed out of all of the devices they are currently signed into. And lastly, once a period of time has passed, then eventually you will want to delete that user's account. Anything you can think to add there, Charlie? Or that covered it all?
Yeah, I think the folks will see the wipe any mobile devices thing and be concerned about that. If you're using the Android device management and you're using the advanced management, then you have the ability to have a work profile on the device. So what you would be doing then is you're actually just wiping the work profile and not impacting on the user's personal device. I think so. That's a it's an important reason to use the advanced Android management if you're using that. But yeah, I think you've covered that pretty well. And I guess what I would maybe add is just no, I think you've got that fine. You probably want to have a process when you delete that user's account of transferring the data to wherever you want that data to be. So it may be that you've got data that's in a user's account that needs to go into someone who's taking that role on in your establishment. So there's a bit of their data management about how you move the data from that user.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I guess it comes down to how you might structure data within the school. If you've got guidance around using shared drives, for instance, and staff are consistent about putting everything which might need to be available to other users in a shared drive, then it's less of a problem. But if there's a lot of data within that user's own account, then absolutely you may want to transfer that in the admin console to a new user, so they have everything they need when they're taking over that role.
Yeah, and similarly, you might want to come up with if that user's a teaching member of staff for Google Classrooms and they're the primary owner of those classrooms, you may want to change from put the new member of staff who's joining, make them the owner, and then remove the person that's leaving the establishment. So that again, that you can do, and you can do that using GAM.
Yeah, absolutely. It's less of a security concern, but it will make it runs a lot smoother at school if you're managing classroom ownership. One tip there, which is something you might want to consider, is using a service account to host those Google Classrooms. Then if someone does leave, there's no need to change teachers because it'll be owned by a school service account, and any other teachers will just be added as secondary teachers. Doesn't impact any functionality, but it stops any issues with orphaned Google Classrooms. So this is obviously a really big area, an important area to focus on, preventing phishing, spoofing, and spam. And the top things we look at here in the security audits are, firstly, have your SPF records been created and are they configured correctly and are working? Is DKIM enabled for checking message authenticity? And likewise, has DMARC been configured? From my experience, SPF is normally configured. DKIM and DMARC, it's 50-50 whether that's been set up or not. So a quick way of checking you've done this is using Google MX Toolbox. Let me just bring it up now and I'll show you what it looks like. Onto my keyboard to be on sleepwear. Google MX Toolbox. Let me just share this tab instead.
So this is kind of my default place to go when you need to check what the settings are for a domain. You want to quickly look at that. You can find all what you need here. So it's a great site for checking that with.
So let's check our own domain now, and let's hope it passes this check. I must admit, I've not checked it in a little while, so this is going to be an interesting test. Let's give it a second to process that. So this is just checking MX records firstly, make sure they're configured, so Mailflow works, checking our SPF records. Okay, so what? Okay, we need to check this, Charlie. What's happened here? I'm certain DKIM and DMARC is set up.
We've maybe got a glitch in the matrix this morning.
Yeah, interesting. I've occasionally seen this have a problem. Yeah, can we cut this bit out of the video? Okay, so after today's call, I'm going to be checking this again. Yeah, that's slightly concerning. I was sure those are all set up. Let me just check a different domain, make sure this is working. I'm getting an error on another domain as well, actually. So looks like I've got a bug on the system today. Okay, but other services as well, which may be more reliable. Yeah, I'm getting the same on another domain as well. So it looks like that Google service isn't quite working this morning. Never mind. Anyway, highly recommend checking that, and we've got lots more details on the Learn More tab on this slide deck. So yeah, please do have a look at that. Oh, and one last thing, I also recommend turning on enhanced pre-delivery message scanning, just to ensure that messages are thoroughly checked by Google before they get delivered, so it doesn't happen after it gets delivered. Only delays messages by 1 or 2 minutes, but I really highly recommend having that turned on. Another important area which sometimes gets overlooked is Gmail's safety features. And sometimes I see these, normally these are on by default, but sometimes I see these are turned off if, for whatever reason, maybe a message got blocked, and rather than just allowing that address, the school might have just turned off that check in the future. I highly recommend leaving these options on. And let me just show you where these are now. So let me just switch back to the admin console, and this time let's go to Apps, Google Workspace, and Gmail. And let's look at a couple of things in here. So firstly, let's go to Safety. And I recommend turning all of these options on. So firstly, let's go into Attachments. So we want to protect against encrypted attachments from untrusted senders. We want to protect against attachments with scripts from untrusted senders. And let's also tick this one, protect against anomalous attachment types in emails. And for each of these, you can choose what happens to these messages. They can either be kept in the inbox and show a warning to the user. They could be moved to the user's spam, or they can be sent to the admin quarantine, in which case the admin would need to check these first before releasing it to the user. We also always want to apply future recommended settings automatically. There's also settings here for, let's just cancel those changes. Let's have a look at settings for links and external images. Again, I recommend turning all of these on to identify links behind shortened URLs, scanning linked images, that's very important, showing warning prompts for any links to untrusted domains, so very good at stopping any potential phishing attacks there. And I think this is one of the most useful ones, spoofing and authentication. And enabling all these checks stops anyone outside your school pretending to be someone from inside the school. Perhaps a phisher or spammer has purchased a very similar domain to your school's domain, and they're going to launch a spear phishing attack against you. Something like this will help stop that, because it will automatically highlight any messages coming from someone pretending to be a user at the school. And again, for each of these, you can just keep these in the inbox and show a very prominent warning to that user, or you can move them to spam or the admin quarantine. So highly recommend turning all of these options on, just so you got the best level of protection. Another option, if you have Education Plus or Education Standard, is Security Sandbox. And Out of all of the audits I've done, I think I can only count on one hand the number of schools have turned this option on. So if you already have it turned on, great. I'm hugely impressed that you've enabled this. If you haven't, I highly recommend turning this on. So the security sandbox is a great way of protecting against ransomware and zero-day exploits and other types of attachments which might get missed by a normal virus checker. So what happens is, as emails come in, if they have an attachment, the attachment gets opened in a private, secure sandbox. If Google detects any unusual behavior, then that message is blocked. So stopping that potential piece of malware, which could be ransomware or another zero-day exploit, from getting through to your users. It only delays messages by 2 or 3 minutes. As I say, it's a feature available in Education Plus, so highly recommend turning it on and getting the most out of that license you're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do recommend to folks to have that turned on. It's a great security feature. It's essentially going back to that idea of heuristic detection. So it looks at the behavior of the attachment and checks that it's doing, it's not trying to do anything that it shouldn't be doing. So really, really important, and particularly as Peter says, around kind of ransomware, zero-day, things that we haven't experienced, the other protections can't detect, that the security sandbox can actually do that. So it's a really important one to have turned on, and definitely worth your Education Plus license, your Education Plus education standard licensing.
Preventing data leaks. So this is a hot topic right now. Just a reminder, so a data leak is unauthorized transfer of sensitive information outside your domain. And once it leaves your domain, you lose control of that data. So it's important to guard that data properly. And there's a few different ways you can do that. And let's have a look at a few of these right now. So let's start with drive sharing settings. So let's jump back into the admin console. There's a couple of different ways of managing sharing options. So the default way is via apps, Google Workspace, and Drive and Docs. And once we get into here, we can go into sharing settings. And this is where you can configure whether you want to allow your users to be able to share outside your school domain or not, or whether you want your users to be able to publish files on the web or enable link sharing to files. And you can control these settings for each of your OUs or groups. So what I tend to recommend is you might want it slightly more open for staff. Staff may need to occasionally share things outside of school. Students, however, may not need to. So in which case you could limit students to only sharing within the school and control that just by selecting the students OU and turning that setting off on here. There's also a new way now to manage sharing, which is available in Education Standard and Education Plus, and that is Drive Trust Rules. And these are available under Rules. And once we get to here, let's turn on a filter just to show our trust rules, because there's lots of different rules available within here. So let's select Type and select Trust. Okay, we can see here what trust rules we already have set up. So our first rule here is allowing everyone to share with anyone, but with a warning. So it warns the user if they are going to share with someone outside a domain. If I wanted to, I could change that rule to something like this. So this one's inactive at the moment, but this would block particular people from sharing outside a domain. Let's just have a quick look at this one. And in here, we can see we have configured a particular OU. The action happens on sharing or receiving. And in this case, it's going to a particular group. And the action is blocked. So trust rules are very configurable, gives you much more control. So for instance, if you wanted to, let's take the finance team, for instance. They deal with a lot of sensitive financial data for the school. you may want to only limit them to sharing with the senior leadership team. Perhaps they don't need to share with other people within the school. So just one example, but gives you an idea of the kinds of things you can achieve with trust rules. Access checker, highly recommend configuring that. Let's just go back to the admin console again, and let's share this tab and go back to Drive and Docs. So let's go to sharing and access checker. So when a user shares a file from Docs or Drive, Google can check that the recipients have access, and it then provides some suggestions. I'd recommend just setting this to recipients only. So Google Docs or Drive isn't suggesting to give more access than is absolutely necessary. Another option while we're in here, very worthwhile configuring, is target audiences. And this reduces the risk of staff oversharing within the school. Have target audiences set up for larger groups of users. So you may want to target audience set up for staff, for instance. So when a member of staff goes to link share a Google Doc, they don't just hit that option to share with anyone. They are then prompted to select from a list and select, actually, no, I just want to share this with all staff and not everyone in the school and not students. You can create target audiences through the directory over here. As you can see, we've already got a few set up here. Let's just press target audience now and give this a quick name. I know I've used that before. Let's just call it staff test. If I've not already used that. And then we can add members. And it opens up to this new tab. And a member can be a user or a group. Don't forget here, with Education Plus, you have dynamic groups. So if you did want to create an all-staff target audience, just simply create a dynamic group, which automatically populates with anyone in the staff OU. And then that will just keep itself up to date and current at all times. Drive add-ons. You might want to disable access to Drive add-ons. These are add-ons which may allow users to give permission to their Drive to read and delete content. And you really want to trust add-ons which you're going to give that level of access to. So I'd recommend blocking add-ons and just enabling the ones that you want to allow access. We've already discussed, I'll skip them then. So desktop access to Drive. I normally recommend turning this off. So this is the Google Drive desktop app, which allows users to download all their files from Drive or sync files up to Drive. And the reason for this is if someone's sawing through something outside, hopefully my noise cancellation is working well here and you don't have any background noise. But
can't hear it, Peter, you're fine.
Okay, I can just hear myself. So as I was saying, desktop access to Drive, I'd recommend turning this off. And the reason for that is if a user is setting this up on a device which isn't up to date, isn't a device you can trust, perhaps a home PC running Windows XP still, then you don't want users downloading all of their school data to a device like that. Or likewise, syncing data from that device, which could have malware in, for you know. So highly recommend turning that off as well.
I think it's worthwhile noting that in the security kind of best practices, that's recognized as a vector. That's a common vector for malware entering into your Google Drive deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing on preventing data leaks is data loss prevention. So this is available in all editions of Google Workspace, and data loss prevention allows you to set up rules and automatically detect sensitive data. So let me just jump back to the admin console quickly and I'll show you where you can find this. So if we go back to rules, and again, I'm just going to apply a filter and let's select data protection. You can see in this domain, we've already got a lot of rules set up to automatically detect any sensitive data. Google really helpfully have some templates available for us, allowing you to really quickly set up some data loss protection rules for your own domain. So let's select this one, for instance, prevent financial information sharing international. So let's select this rule. We get taken to this tab, and we can either apply this to our whole domain, or we can apply it to particular OUs, users, or groups. This rule can be applied to Google Chat and Google Drive. So let's leave away selected. And in here, the template has already filled out these regular expressions for us. We can also, for each of these, select the confidence level. Currently it's set to high. Set it to a different level depending on how accurate that is. Sometimes you may want to reduce that or increase it if it's generating too many false positives. Let's press continue. And here we can select what we want to happen. So in Google Chat, we can block that message and stop that data from being shared. Likewise, in Google Drive, we can block sharing. We could just warn users about that sharing. We could disable download, print, and copy on that file, or we could apply a drive label. Now, drive labels are available in Education Standard and Plus, and these are ways of labeling confidential content, and it provides a really clear badge at the top of that document then that that is a confidential piece of item which shouldn't be shared outside of school. And you can automate that within here. And once you're done with that, just press continue, and then you can save that rule, check all the details, set it to active, and hit create. So initially, I'd probably recommend starting off with just warning users and seeing how it goes. Then you may want to look at blocking that in the future, and you can track all of this from the security dashboard. So if you have Education Standard and Plus, simply go to the security tab here, go to Security Center and Dashboard. And if we scroll down, you can see all of the DLP incidents and the top policy incidents that have been triggered. And we can also view these reports in here. If you don't have Education Standard or Plus, you can also find this information under the reporting tab as well. And then from here, you can investigate these if you want to find out more details about what files actually triggered those alerts. So missing from there, Charlie?
No, that was great, Peter. And I think the next one we're going on to is a really important one that folks need to be aware of. This is going to have a significant impact for education establishments, and there's a bit of work involved in this if it's not something that you've been aware of before. For a few schools, this has been a bit of an eye-opener about how their sign-ins and users have been authorizing third-party applications. So it's definitely worth a look at.
You can find this information within the admin console. If you go to security, go to access and data control and API controls. So from here, there's a couple of useful things in here. Let's first have a look at manage third-party app access. So if you've already explicitly allowed or blocked any third-party apps, and third-party apps can be websites which a user may have signed into with their school account. It could be an Android app or a Chrome extension. And whenever that happens, I'm sure you've seen it before, when you sign into a website or installed a new app, it prompts you for some permissions. At the most basic level, if it's just for signing in, it's just for your public domain profile information. But if it's an app such as the Screencastify extension, for instance, you may have installed that to do some screen recordings, and that will need access to your Google Drive to share those recordings. So within here, we've already got some apps configured. We can also see all the apps our users have used. If we have a look up on this tab, we can see there's 445 accessed apps. If I select view this list, I can see each of the apps my users have used and how many have used these apps, and also crucially what permissions those apps have requested. So Pear Deck, for instance, has requested access to Classroom, Drive, and one more, and you can see it's one I've already configured. So if I select change access, I can see that I've already trusted this one for my domain. I'll just confirm it all again. Again, a bit like the rules we looked at earlier, you can trust apps for particular OUs. And the big change happening here, as Charlie just mentioned, is from July 31st, any unconfigured apps for users under 18 won't be available any longer. So highly recommend having a look in here. Otherwise, it might catch some schools and users out, and those apps may not be available any longer. Now, there's a lot of apps here, and this could take a while to do through this interface. To speed this up, you can download the whole list of all of these apps to a Google Sheet. You can then modify on the sheet and then bulk update it using this option here and just re-upload that sheet you've edited. That's a much faster way of doing it rather than going through individually and selecting change access.
It's worth pointing out, although those apps there, they have the verified badge on it, that just means that Google has verified that the owner of that badge, they've gone through a procedure to get authorization for the app, verification for the app. It doesn't mean that you've approved the app on your domain, it just means that Google's verified it.
Exactly, and even if it is a verified app, it still might not be an app that you want your users to use. TikTok is a verified app, and it just verifies that it adheres to Google's security standards, but you may not want your school students to be signing into TikTok using their Google Workspace account. So yeah, the verified badge, really helpful, but don't just rely on that, do review the app as well. And while we're in there, just really quickly to mention, within here, you can also protect your access to your APIs at a much higher level. So for instance, you can see here, we've got Google Calendar set as unrestricted, but for Drive and Gmail, we've restricted it. And you can just change that here. So you can have unrestricted, so any user can provide, can access that service, or just restrict that just to trusted apps only. Right, so let's jump back to this presentation. And don't worry, we'll be posting reminders in the community chat about this, just to remind everyone, we don't want anyone getting caught out with this. Oh, and there's a video here as well, which we'll share after this, which goes through everything we just discussed. Did you want to take this one, Charlie? You've done a lot of work around apps and extension workflows, haven't you?
Yeah, so really this one is really just about your apps and extensions that you've got deployed on Chrome browser, Chrome OS devices. Again, it's very similar to what you've got with the API access extensions and so on, is understanding what users are doing with, which applications you're approving, managing those. You can turn on, block those ones you don't want users to use. There is a workflow that allows users to request apps and extensions. So you can enable that workflow, which essentially means that you as the admin are managing what's available, what they can install, but they can request something if they wish it, and then you can review that and allow it. And when you allow that application, it automatically then is installed for all those users that requested it. So it's a very neat workflow. So that's something I recommend that folks have a look at in terms of enabling that. Turn on that Chrome browser management. You can get the token from Google Workspace and then deploy that with your Chrome deployments. It means that the Chrome browser then appears as a user, essentially, and you can manage it in the same way. And then you've got the appropriate policies applied to your groups and organizational units for your security. And yeah, you can block apps and extensions based on permissions. So if you're concerned around apps that may use, for example, the camera or USB, you can block any applications based on which features of the device they want to make use of. So it's certainly something to consider in terms of enhancing your security.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great overview, Charlie. I don't think I've got anything to add.
Grand.
Apart from one thing, so I think you briefly mentioned it, but you can now, this is quite a new feature, you can now block or allow apps for particular groups as well as OUs. So you can be a lot more targeted about how your apps are deployed, which is nice. Okay, we're almost at the end now. Google Groups, just really quickly. This is an area where we look at in the audit, particularly around who has access to the groups. Are these groups visible to everyone in the domain, where everyone in the domain can view and post messages and see what's going on in there? Sometimes schools can be surprised about how their groups are configured, and a group which should only have been restricted to a particular group membership was actually viewable to students. So highly recommend checking that. And even worse, sometimes some groups which schools thought were private were actually available to the entire world on the internet. So very worthwhile looking about. You can use GAM to get a list of all of your groups and your group settings and really quickly verify how all of your groups are configured. And we've got to learn more here as well on how you can find out that information. And the last one is a big part of the audit. Obviously, Chromebooks are used by loads of schools now, is Chrome device management. And there's 500 Chrome policies alone to configure. So it's a huge area for schools to look at. I've just listed here a few of the key areas to look at when you're looking at your Chrome policies and our top recommendations to configure. So firstly, you want to review any out-of-date devices which are no longer receiving updates from Google and checking where they're being used, perhaps move them out of circulation and replace those if you can. You want to enable auto-update to the latest version if possible, or at least the long-term service edition, just to ensure you are getting updates on there and you've not pinned it to a much older version of Chrome. Highly recommend restricting sign-in to your domain only, so only your domain accounts can be used on your managed Chromebooks. You want to enforce re-enrollment, so if a device gets power washed, it automatically gets enrolled again onto your domain.
Yeah, I've got multiple stories of devices being power washed and hardware reset, and then being able to be recovered because of that forced re-enrollment. So absolutely, if you go check your settings, make sure you have that set up, because that protects your inventory and protects your devices from being used elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Back when I was an IT manager at a college, I once had someone phone up saying, I've just purchased one of your devices from a car boot sale. It's about 100 miles away. The device was locked. Luckily, it had our name and college name and address and phone number on there. And yeah, it allowed us to locate that device again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also want to enable safe browsing, safe search, and YouTube. You may want to enable YouTube restrictive mode, just to make sure you're giving your users a safe browsing environment. Going back to data leaks and managing that, I also recommend disabling external devices, or at the very least, setting SD cards and USB keys to read only. So users can do things like maybe copy photos off of their camera, but not take away any sensitive school data onto that external device. Because as soon as it goes onto that device, you've lost control of that data. So recommend making that read only or disabling that. And one last thing is preventing secondary accounts, so that users can't sign in with a personal account onto a managed school device. They have to use their school account. And that's our last slide. So those are our top recommendations to look at if you're auditing your own domain. And as I mentioned earlier, this is also a service we provide. So please do get in contact if that's something you're interested in. The process normally takes about a week. We start off with a call to learn about your environment. We then commence data collection. So we We look at all these different settings on your admin console. We look at how groups are configured, how shared drivers are configured, hundreds of settings within the audit. And then we put all that into a really comprehensive report, and we'll work with you to implement those findings through an implementation workshop we'd have together. So if that sounds of interest, then please do get in touch.